we also looked at communities that might be impacted indirectly by this pandemic, and one of them was the theater community in Canada, where plays were shut down across the country, and we have a podcast that does podcast versions of great award-winning theater productions, and so we actually went out to the ones that were closed down and turned them into podcasts. So we tried to sort of indirectly meet some needs. Again, as a public broadcaster, we try to think of how we can support in different ways. And in terms of a company, it's interesting because we are a television broadcaster. We have a huge news division. We have a huge sports division. We have the Canadian rights for the Olympics. And so obviously much of our business was impacted. And so we in podcasting pivoted to working from home almost immediately and 100%, really incredibly simply. And we not only kept our regular slate going and haven't, like you, Hernan, we haven't missed a deadline on any of our series. And we've also had to increase production because we're filling gaps now in other content areas for the CBC. So when all of a sudden they had all these TV productions that are paused or shut down, they look to us to say, can you guys, create more programming with some of these resources? And so we actually have amped up our production remotely, which is really great. It's really exciting. And I also think one other thing as a business, to be honest, CBC is maybe 3 years old, and working from home and all those sort of very forward-thinking work models were not always adopted there. And so because we're now forced to be pulled into the 21st century and pulled into more nimble working situations, I think that I'm not sure that our team will ever go back fully. We will probably be largely remote. And what that does is allows us a competitive advantage. It allows us to attract and retain talent, production talent. Right. Because we're not saying you've got to come into the office and produce like, the CBC's used to. So I think, we're always looking for silver linings in situations like this. And I would say that that's one of them for sure, is our work model is changed.
It's been really interesting to watch the pivot, both in terms of the work habits. Podcasting really is a medium where we could and we're able to pretty much adapt quickly. I mean, we've had some challenges with some hosts and authors who we really did need to get into a studio, but we have made it work. We've been sending microphones all over the country and just, doing remote training sessions, having producers dial in and stay on with the host or during an interview. So we're making it work. And I think from an advertising perspective, I was pretty impressed with how quickly our industry as a whole really shifted. I remember just a couple of days into the pandemic, listening to a daily news podcast, run a story about people being stranded on a cruise ship, and the mid-roll was a cruise ad. So I thought, that's, but the changes were made fairly quickly. So it's encouraging to see, and there's so much innovation, and energy in the space. It's not all that surprising.
And we'll save a lot of rent.
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to talk. We know we have a lot of creators listening in today. So I want to talk a little bit about greenlighting a podcast. We all get pitches almost on a daily basis, and we're now up to over 1 million podcasts. A lot of them inactive, but competition has really grown fierce. So you guys have some really big shows, some mid-sized shows, some smaller shows of all different genres and formats. I think it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about what you look for in a pitch, what your team looks for in a pitch, and what is going to make a pitch stand out and get the green light to be part of your network.
Sure. We probably see 25 or 30 pitches a week. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're coming from everywhere. Now, we're seeing with all this shaking and rattling and rolling that's going on everywhere, we're seeing a lot of podcasters who are on different platforms, come on over and not happy with the revenue, even though revenue is very, very difficult right now. But generally speaking, there are three things that I look for. First of all, the quality of the content, okay? Secondly, I'm very interested in the social media opportunities with the host or subject matter. We have the ability to promote across every single podcast that's on our network an unsold inventory. So we can reach a lot of podcast consumers simply by by using our own promotion resources. But if it's somebody who's got, maybe a little bit of TVQ or maybe not a lot, but a huge social following, that's very interesting to us. And then, of course, if it's a show that deals with guests, we'll take any guest that the host wants. But if it happens to be a guest that has their own strong social media following, that's very important to us too. We don't have certain markers as it relates to different categories of programming because we're in every category of programming. So we're not looking for certain things because you won't find them if if you've got 20 different categories that you're filling. Every single podcast that is greenlit by Podcast One eventually comes across my desk. And, I came from the old days in the music business when they used to talk about somebody who has great ears, Great ears only last for a certain amount of time. So what you want to do is you want to surround yourself with other people who have great ears in areas that you don't. So I get a lot of input from the staff, but ultimately these are our partners, and I want to know who I'm partners with.
Hernan, what do you look for?
So since Norm spoke a lot about the interview style shows, I'm going to speak more about the narrative style shows, which I know are of interest of many people in the audience. We look for a number of things in a pitch, and they come again. Many of we receive still every week, and we look at them in a development pitch meeting weekly. We look at characters, so we look at how great the characters are, how clear they come across, and how much would people identify with them, either rooting for them or rooting against them, or being somewhere in the middle. Second thing we look at is obviously we look at a story that would capture listeners' imagination, and you don't need to capture every listener's imagination, but you need to get to a critical mass of listeners with a question that will drive listeners and want them to listen from beginning to end. Remember that a lot of the narrative miniseries that we make are structured over 6 episodes, very tight, 40 to 35 to 40 minute episodes, and we designed them in a way that we want people to be engaged and to be paying a lot of attention, listen minute by minute. Then we look at the host and what permission the host has to tell the story. So there are hosts that have a personal connection with the story because they know one of the characters, or there's something that they were fascinated by, or maybe one of their relatives or one of the parents suffer from something that is central to the story. So definitely we're interested in what kind of what stakes, what separates the host from anybody else who could be telling the story. And then finally we look at access. We look at whether the host has one particular entry point, exclusive access to one of the subjects, exclusive tape. When there's already a lot of tape that has been gathered, that's great. That's always better. There's some things we stay away from. One of them, a big one, is we stay away from open-ending stories where disappearing people stories, for instance. I mean, they're great. We actually have a show called The Vanish about somebody who disappears, but that's a very unique show. With every episode, people come in knowing that they may not know at the end of the episode whether we know the answer or not. But in general, we try to go into a story when we know that we're going to get to a conclusive answer, a conclusive ending that will be.
Makes sense. Leslie, how about you?
I think we do a lot of the narrative deep dives as well, and so everything that Hernan said, we subscribe to as well in terms of character and we think about the world that you're going to create. Can we hear a world that's unique that you can take the listener into? And I see someone. Timothy's got a question that I can hear my answer to a little bit here. It's about audience building and sort of what's the advantage of working with a podcast publisher in terms of like why bring a pitch to us, in other words. And I think one of the things that's important when we consider a pitch is who is the potential audience. and how are you going to find them? And is there something else that out there that's like this? How is this unique? And how might it actually leverage that other audience too, that's loving that other show, and how can you potentially partner up? So I think when we look at a pitch, we look at audience potential. Certainly, is the idea unique? Is it compelling, and is it well focused? And does the person pitching have the chops to pull it off? And for us, that's not always it doesn't always mean that it won't go forward if you can't do the whole thing. What we do is sort of see what your skill set is. If we love the idea, we'll look at what your skill set is, and we look for the gaps. And then we build pop-up teams around that production to fill in some of those gaps. But I would say, really understanding the competitive space. There are over 1 million podcasts out there now. So I think it's really important to do your homework. Understand that if you're pitching something, that you know what else is out there, but you can tell me why this is a unique offer that is going to find an audience and solves a problem in that space. I think I put the onus on the person pitching to not just be in your head creatively. That's really important too. It's got to be your own vision, but think strategically. Come on my side of the desk and think about the competitive landscape and how this is something that we think could win.
That is such great advice. Really, really solid. It's amazing how many things you get that aren't thought through to that level. So I think you just gave creators a wonderful set of tips.
Can I add something? Because it's a question that I'm reading here on the side, which is really great. The question was, I said that there were 3 things, and that I looked for, and the third thing is a passion for the podcast. It's really, really important if you're going to have a podcasting partner to know that they are committed to that podcast. That's why you don't see making mid-dollar guarantees to somebody because they're famous. If they're famous, the reality probably is they're doing movies and television and live appearances and merchandising and all kinds of things, which means no matter how much you pay them, the podcast is going to be down at the lower end of the spectrum. So we want people who are committed to podcasting and all of the outgrowth that can come from that. And as a part of that question, there was, why are women's podcasts with influencers seemingly doing well? And my personal opinion is, I think people are tired of the news. I think they're just, the news is just scaring the hell out of people. And I think people are looking to be entertained, whether it's a great show from Hernan or whether it's Caitlin Bristow talking to her friends to lighten things up. People are looking for original entertainment.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Hernan, I just want to direct this one to you. You talked in your introduction a little bit about how some of the podcasts have been so successful, they've been migrated to film and television. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about IP rights and how that works for a podcaster.
We obviously, every time that we do a new deal, we learn something that we didn't know before, but we've been doing television adaptation deals since 2018, the first one being Dr. Death, which we sold to Universal and then became a 2-season series order. And what we found over the last several, year and a half, really, since we started to do it, is that the more we get, the more we work on getting talent attached to the IP ahead of time, and talent means either a showrunner, an actor, or a director, ideally all 3, but you can get packages done with just 2 of them. The more competition we'll get from multiple outlets that want to participate in the rights for our show. So for instance, actually, this one hasn't been announced, so I can't speak to it that much. But
come on, we can break some news here. It's been a heck of a week. Let's go.
We had to ask the other party on it, but I was going to talk about Dying for Sex, which we just did with a great show run, but it hasn't been announced. But the case of The Shrink Next Door, which we did jointly with Bloomberg, we essentially did a deal. We were talking to 2 production companies, and Paul Rudd was attached to one of them, and Will Ferrell was attached to the other, with Michael Showalter, the director. We started to get them interested in essentially becoming part of the same project, and then we eventually, through the help of our agency UTA, they're amazing, they got Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd to agree to be part of the same package, whichever production entity we ended up with. So that's what we did. We ended up with MRC, an amazing production house, most famous for House of Cards, but they're responsible for some of the best, shows from the golden age of television. And once the show package was done, then we went to look for a writer, and that took a while because finding a showrunner who not attached in an overall deal with a major production studio is difficult, and there's a lot of demand for experienced showrunners, and there's so many shows being made that a lot of them have multiple job offers at the same time, and they're looking at what they're going to do 2 shows from now.
Right.
We found this amazing showrunner from the UK, Georgia Pritchett. She's best known for Veep and Succession. She did an amazing pitch, and that's how we ended up selling the show to Apple TV, a deal that just got announced a couple of weeks ago. All the shows have been different, but I mean, what you need to think about is think about how a television network executive would receive a pitch for your show. It's going to be a combination of the podcast with a listener base. Obviously, they're going to be more interested in the more listeners the podcast has, and the more visible it is. But they're also going to be interested in looking at the package. Who else is excited about this piece of IP that will attach their name or lend their name to the production? So think about both things simultaneously. This would be my advice. And get a good agent. Get a great agent, obviously, and recommend ours highly enough, but there are several great agencies in town.
Terrific. Good. Let's move on to monetization. We've talked a little bit about advertising. We've talked about licensing in terms of the Joe Rogan deal, and there's been some other deals for licensing specifically. But it seems to me we're at sort of a crossroads in our space where, for the first several years, it was all about ad revenue. And now what we're really seeing is a lot of diversification in terms of revenue streams. We're seeing a lot more merch. We're seeing live events, or we were seeing live events until very recently. But any tips you have for creators? We always get asked this question, and the first thing we say to most podcasters is, you're not going to get rich doing this, and it's a really hard amount of work, right? Because
that's not true.
Those are 2 misconceptions, right? That you're immediately going to get rich, and it's very easy to do, because it isn't. But I'd love to hear your opinion on sort of what you would share with a creator or someone new to the space about monetization, both in terms of what the thresholds are like on the ad revenue, if you want to speak to that. I get asked that all the time. I'm sure you guys do too. And then just any other insights you can share on how your businesses are evolving in terms of offering creators diversified streams of revenue. So, and Leslie, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I'm gonna let my co-panelists take most of this, because as a public broadcaster in Canada, we're only partially funded by monetization, so it's not a huge. It's important. It's an important piece of our business, but we're also government funded. So we do have pre-rolls and mid-rolls, and we are starting up a branded podcast division in our sales team. But I would just say one thing that I think. The thing that I feel strongly is that it's really important to have someone who is selling your show become an expert in the space. That traditional sales, it does not apply to podcasting. I think there are unique challenges and opportunities in the podcast space that I think everybody, including all of us, we need to continually keep learning and understand what's working. So I'm going to not take up more time, because it's I think more of a focus for you guys.
Got it. Hernan, Norm, have at it. What do you think?
Well, I mean, look, of the 3 points that I made, there is a fourth. We got to be able to make money. We have to be able to make money for our partner, and we have to be able to make enough money to support our infrastructure. And it's getting more and more difficult. Hernan was mentioning agents. I remember in the early days when I first got started, agents were coming to me because they needed digital solutions for their client base, things that their clients could fit into their schedule and own. And audio podcasts were fantastic. Then as the business, so we felt very closely aligned to agents. Then as the business got more and more sophisticated, more and more revenue and what have you, then agents sort of, morphed into, hey, I know you got a podcast. Let me come in so that I can get you a much better deal. Okay. So, not that we don't have great relationship with certain agents, we do, but, we like to get them when they're young, and create a partnership that demonstrates that they can make a lot of money. There's a lot of people, Adam Carolla makes a ton of money, but in terms of looking for different ways to monetize him, aside from his podcast, because of our new association with LiveX Live, Live by Live, Adam's going to actually do a live podcast in Houston, Texas this weekend, in a large venue, but there's only going to be 200 people there. They're all going to be masked, and we're going to have musical guests on the program, because Live by Live is known for streaming musical artists. So we're actually going to pivot the kind of program that it currently is to a more special type of program that takes advantage of our ability to reach a huge audience with video, as well as build the huge audience that Carolla already has in audio. So, look, I think Hernan does better than anybody in the business. That's just a fact, okay? We're a small company, and we need to stick to our knitting. We don't have a lot of time to be spending going out and making video deals that we get a small piece of, when if we increase the size of the podcast audience, our partner and we are going to make a lot of money. That doesn't mean that it won't move in that direction.
Right.
But right now, we like to make sure that we can make enough of a margin off of the stuff that we do that we can keep the lights on.
Yeah. I want to talk about audience development in a minute, but Hernan, I definitely want to give you a chance to talk about the monetization piece from the creator's perspective. What
I would recommend, in addition, obviously, to advertising and television adaptations, which is true, they're lumpy. They come in waves. Sometimes you can have a huge deal, and then there's nothing that happens, and then once your show actually gets made, that's when the real payoff happens. So it's important to develop a pipeline, but we should talk about subscription fees, and they come in two ways. One is the direct-to-consumer business that any podcast creators can set up via Patreon or Memberful or Supporting Cast or Glow, or a number of platforms that enable direct payment from fans to podcasts, and many of them give additional or shoulder content to the most premium subscribers, and those are the ones that seem to have the best retention. But the other way is doing it through a platform that licenses the rights to carry shows ad-free, like Stitcher Premium. They're not the only one. Stitcher Premium is the one with the most scale, and they're not necessarily exclusive of what a creator can do directly on with their own Patreon page. So we are developing all of those licensing opportunities. We are on Stitcher Premium, but in addition to that, we have our own service called Wondery Plus, where people can pay $5 a month or $35 a year for the rights to have early access and ad-free access to our shows. The other revenue streams are a little more difficult to get through, but they're still worth exploring. Are international. We have our office in the UK with Stitcher that sells advertising directly in the UK. But in addition to that, we have deals in Germany, France, and throughout Latin America, in Canada and Australia. And then finally, book deals. Again, harder to come by, but we have done our first ever, I don't think we've announced it yet, a deal based on one of our properties to publish a book, and that's a multi-country deal that will come through in 2021. So definitely, it pays to be scrappy. It pays to be imaginative. It pays to look at every possible opportunity that you can, because you shouldn't assume that advertising is the only revenue stream.
Yeah, it really is amazing. That's a great point. We actually signed the How Stuff Works team to do a series of books with our Flatiron book imprint, so it does work that way as well. Leslie, I know you really wanted to talk about audience development to help creators. We talked on our pre-call about just how incredibly competitive it has become. Norm has spoken a little bit about influencers and what they bring to the table in terms of a sort of a pre-existing audience. But for a podcaster or a creator who's early in the space, who maybe doesn't have a huge social media platform going into this, but just has a great show with great content, what suggestions would you give them for how to build an audience?
Sure. It really is. It's almost as hard and as much work as making a show as it is building that audience. And to kind of echo the revenue piece, be scrappy, be inventive, turn over every stone, just like Hernan was saying, it means do the work. And I think one thing you can really do is identify, again, what I said earlier about be aware of what other shows are out there. And if you're launching a show with that horrible feeling of, oh God, I have an audience of 0 until I start, making sure that this podcast is surfacing in front of people, reach out to that show and look at building relationships with shows that have audiences that you're after. And I think it really is a business of relationships, and don't be shy. Reach out and see whether they might consider reviewing or listening to an episode or mentioning it to their listeners, because in the digital space we can both have those audiences. You're not necessarily as head-to-head competitive. You can both kind of feed that audience need for that kind of content. So I would say do that kind of homework and be bold about reaching out and trying to foster some relationships. I think also figure out where you think your audience is hanging out and living on social when they're not listening to your podcast. So for example, if it's something around, mental health, if you have a podcast like we do called Other People's Problems and it's about therapy, think about what other spaces in social media, what other support groups, what other institutions might have communities of people who might like your podcast, and reach out there and try to be there in social media, try to be there in community organizations, like sort of be inventive and think outside of the podcast space in order to connect with audiences, and just be really active and creative on social. I think to Norm's point, it's really, really key to just be in that space and be, just try ideas that you might not work, but you can, take a shot at seeing if you can connect people to your audience or to your show.
It's a very creative space too. And I think to your point, you really do have to think very creatively about cross promotions and swaps. I love to give this example because I think it's a really good one. We have a show called Grammar Girl, which is a very large show. We had a smaller show, which was a vertical, a biography vertical, which we did the first season on Robin Williams with an author from the New York Times, Dave Itzkoff, who's the culture reporter there. And in order to help grow that show, our marketing coordinator, Morgan Ratner, went and talked to Dave and put him on the Grammar Girl show as a guest to talk about how to write a biography. It was brilliant. It was just a really creative and interesting way to get the Grammar Girl audience engaged in our new show, which was focused on Robin Williams. So, I mean, you really have, and that's kind of the level of detail you have to, be at this point in time. You have to be really creative in terms of finding ways that maybe are non-traditional to get your show in front of other podcast listeners. So good point.
We had a series, one of our Uncover series was called The Village, and it was about the history of the gay community in Toronto, but it was really about tracking a serial killer and how prevalent serial killing in the gay community was. And we created connections with Pride, World Pride, and really worked with them on surfacing this podcast. And we ended up doing a panel at World Pride and being throughout some of their social media, and it really built a relationship in a non-traditional way. Like they weren't doing a podcast, but we reached out to them to say, we have a piece of content that we think would be really relevant to your organization and your event in New York. So we spent 2 weeks in New York with all kinds of people who weren't thinking they were going to be talking about a podcast.
That's really interesting. Hernan, anything to add there?
On cross audience development.
Yeah.
I have to say we haven't learned any new tricks in the last year or so that really have moved the needle beyond the traditional feed drops, which we have been doing for since the beginning. We still find that they're the most effective. They have limitations for sure. We have been adding more internal cross promo, and they come in a number of ways. And if anything, probably what we have gotten a little better at over the last year or so is tracking them. All of them now have a pixel throughout the pod size, so we can get a better idea of their conversion rates.
Right. That's a whole other topic we could talk about, right? That's an interesting angle. Norm, anything there?
Yeah, I think so. From the point of view of the individual podcaster, which is, I think, the approach that some of these people are asking for. Yes, there are 1 million podcasts on Apple. But if you take a look at what you would define as a successful podcast in terms of audience delivery and revenue generated, it's not even 1,000. It's a minuscule amount. So you need to find a way, and there are ways, to hook up with a platform or a network that's going to help you get there. We launched in October a new service called Launchpad. And what it does is it provides the back-end services and platform services and audience measurement services that small podcasters, who are in their garage or they've got an audience of 100 or what have you, they have to go out and pay for that. Well, we provide that free of charge. And one of the reasons we like to do this is because we now have 1,000 podcasts that we listen to over time. And so it's kind of a farm system for us so that we can discover stuff that we would never be able to discover otherwise. And also, it's a potential revenue stream because although they don't pay anything for it, we have the right to digitally insert 2 commercials in it. I mean, generally, these are podcasts that wouldn't be able to sell to an advertiser unless it was their cousin or their friend or what have you, because their audiences just aren't big enough. But when you put them all together, it's almost all unduplicated, and you come out with a pretty big number.
Good, thank you. I think I'm going to jump into some of our audience questions because we've got quite a few in there. Some of them are quite interesting. Is there a space for feature-length audio dramas? We launched an audio drama back in end of 2017, early 2018, I think it was, and it was challenging. So I'd love to think we have some creators out there who are interested in audio drama. Hernan, you've done a few of them.
But actually, we found that the shorter the better in audio drama. We did a lot in 2016. We stopped making them because of economics, and we got back into the business with Blood Ties in December, which went really well. We're now in season 2 of Blood Ties, and we found that 20-minute episodes are probably the sweet spot.
Serialized, right?
Even shorter than that.
That's right. When you think of feature length, think about breaking it into chapters like a book, and that's effective.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think anybody's done it better than Hernan has. I mean, I think. Look, I mean, there's nothing the matter with giving a compliment to a competitor who really deserves a compliment.
Thank you.
God knows there's plenty of people out there who aren't going to compliment you, me, or anybody on this call. My hat's off to you. I have great respect for everybody that's on this call.
Thank you. Another question. What genres are doing particularly well right now? And what genres perhaps do you, further that question, where are the genres where you perceive there to be some content gaps where you could maybe use more shows?
I don't think there's anything that isn't being done, with 1 million podcasts out there. I mean, look, I get people who come in to see me and, I have a great idea, It's sort of like when I was at Westwood One, they used to say, I have a great idea. Get Mick Jagger to host an interview show and everybody will listen to it, But when somebody comes in with an original idea and you go search that on Apple, you'll probably find 100 other podcasts that are actually doing that. So the most important thing you can do, in my estimation, regardless of what it is you're producing, in what genre, is hook up with somebody who can bring audience to you, because if they can bring audience, advertisers will follow.
I'll tell you, there's one gap, that one major gap, but unfortunately there's a reason for that gap, and it's kids and family programming. That there's not nearly enough made of them, and the reason is that being that we're a primarily advertising supported business, and it's advertising primarily direct response, there aren't that many advertisers, obviously, that or any should be targeting kids, but they're targeting their parents when the kids are around. So that really limits the number of advertisers that can go after that.
It does. You know, I think PINA is doing quite well. Megaphone Panoply's children's premium subscription service.
Right?
Yeah, that's
NPRX
one good example.
launched Tracks, which is more of a teen space. I think honestly, I think that falls a little bit more to those of us in public broadcasting, where it's a gap that I think we've intentionally looked to fill, and we're working really hard on filling on creating more kids and family programming.
Does anybody here think that the subscription model, that's been pitched by a couple of companies and they've raised a lot of money off of it with checkered results? Well, not even checkered results, pretty lousy results. But does anybody here think that model, of creating the Netflix for audio will work and is sustainable?
Well, I know, Hernan, you have a premium subscription offering.
We do have a pre-subscription offering. It's not huge, but it's growing, and it's substantially bigger than it was a year ago. Yeah. And we're about to make some changes to the to our service to really lean into it. That's something I can't talk about it yet, but we'll be talking about it over the next couple of months.
Well, we will.
You can talk about it.
Yeah, that's good.
You can talk about it. You're a private company. I'm just becoming public again.
I think on the subscription front, we talked a little bit on our pre-call about the fact that for the first time, we've heard some numbers thrown out for Luminary being around 80,000. There's an article in Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago. I think the thing with subscription offerings is, number one, it's very difficult to take something away from listeners that they have traditionally gotten for free and have become accustomed to getting for free. I do think there's some value, though, in premium services like Stitcher and some of the others, where a listener can both binge stuff that is being released slower because of the ad model on free feeds and commercial free, without any ad units.
I think if there's a unique offer, if there's a unique benefit as an option, I personally think that as part of a company that also offers free podcasts, I think it can work really well. I've always worried ever since Luminary was announced. I wondered how a subscription-only business in this world of so much content out there could work. So it's interesting to see their struggle. But I think as an offer that has, exclusive previews or content that you're not going to hear elsewhere as an option or as you say, commercial free, some benefits to paying a reasonable subscription fee, I can see that really working as part of a larger offering.
So I'm the only one who thinks that a subscription model for audio is a really, really tough putt.
For podcasts or for audio? Yeah. I mean, if you look at audio, seriously.
For podcasts. No, I'm not talking about audio. I mean,
massive business, Audible, massive business.
Oh, sure. I mean, we just hooked up with a company that's doing great business in pay-per-view and generating subscriptions.
Right.
So, no, I'm talking about podcasts.
I'm optimistic that they can become meaningful. That's definitely one of the things that we're going to be trying to do to be more into.
And I think the other thing too is that a lot of these platforms have multiple ways that they can put out content for consumption. There's opportunity to add transcripts and other assets, video assets that perhaps could be considered as part of the premium model that aren't that are add-ons to the podcast or give the podcast more value.
I think that's a creative challenge for the business, and I think that's exciting. Yeah.
We have about 3 minutes left.
Your audio is breaking up, and I'm still upside down, so don't worry.
Is my audio breaking up? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So I guess just, before we part, maybe give us a new show you're listening to that you really enjoy, perhaps not one of your own.
I'll start with The Rabbit Hole from New York Times. It's actually quite an amazing show.
Great.
I don't listen to anything that isn't my own. I mean, we've got 350 podcasts, and when I'm in the car, I'm listening to podcasts. When I'm laying on a beach, whenever that comes back, I'll be listening to podcasts. But the quality control of our programs is our employees, so we're always listening to our own podcasts. But there's plenty of them out there.
Right.
Mine's not new, but I went back to, in these times of stress and news overload and just anxiety, I went back to finally listen to Finding Fred, which I hadn't listened to yet.
Ah, good.
And it is a balm to the soul right now.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the great thing about podcasts. It doesn't need to be new. They're like books on a big, huge, giant digital library shelf that you can always discover. So that's, yeah, it's been really great, a great listen.
Thank you, guys. You have been insightful. You have been energetic, and I think you really shared a lot of tremendously valuable content to our audience of about, well, I don't know how many people actually attended. But anyway, it's been great. Victor Harwood, again, thank you so much for organizing this. And I hope everyone stays safe and healthy. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you,
looking forward to seeing everyone right side up.
Wash your hands. Wear a mask.
Right.
Exactly. Wash your hands.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you,
Thanks,
Norm.
guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.